All right, today we're jumping right into a huge global economic showdown, a real high-stakes standoff between two of the world's biggest democracies. We're talking tariffs, geopolitics, and a relationship worth billions that got pushed right to the edge. So, let's get into it. And it all kicked off with just one number, 25%. It felt like it happened overnight. This one tariff got slapped on a massive range of Indian goods. And just like that, one of the world's most important trade partnerships was completely upended. So the big question is, right, how on earth did this one number put a, nearly $87 billion trade relationship on the brink? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Okay, so our story really starts with this sudden trade shock, this one event that basically ignited the whole dispute. I mean, just look at how fast this all went down. You've got the announcement on July 30th, then bam, 2 days later, the tariffs are actually in effect. And then, just a week after that, the U.S. is already threatening to go even higher. It was just this rapid-fire escalation that left basically zero time for any kind of diplomacy. Okay, so what was this all about? What were the official reasons? Well, from the U.S. perspective, it was a few things. They pointed to the trade imbalance, the U.S. buying way more from India than it was selling. Then there were India's ties to Russia. And finally, the U.S. complained that India's own tariffs were too high. But India, well, they weren't having it. Their response was just as strong. They talked about strategic autonomy, which is basically their right to make their own foreign policy choices. They also said they had to protect their own industries and that the U.S. demands were just plain unfair. And listen, the language got really sharp. This quote here from a Trump aide just shows you how heated and personal it got. This wasn't your standard dry trade talk anymore. It turned into accusations of, cheating and not being a real friend. All right, so moving on. Because a 25% tariff isn't just a number on a piece of paper, right? It causes real-world economic pain. It has these ripple effects that you can actually feel. Let's dig into that. And the scale here is wow. It's just staggering. We are talking about $87 billion worth of Indian exports. That's the amount that suddenly had this huge 25% tariff slapped on it. And keep in mind, this wasn't some targeted hit on a few specific products. Nope, this was a blanket tariff covering almost everything.
And when you break that number down, you can really see which sectors got hit the hardest. We're talking about the absolute engines of India's modern economy. You've got electronics and smartphones, pharmaceuticals, which are so critical, plus huge employers like textiles and gems and jewelry. They were all right in the middle of this.
And the impact was so specific. Think about it. India was just hitting its stride as a major iPhone exporter. That was suddenly under threat. Then there's pharma. The U.S. gets something like 40 to 65% of its generic drugs from India. So this move risked raising prices for American consumers. And for things like textiles, well, big buyers could just say, you know what? We'll go to Vietnam or somewhere else with no tariffs. And of course, the markets. They reacted instantly. The Indian rupee dropped, and stocks tied to exports took a nosedive. So if we zoom out to the big picture, the macroeconomic level, economists were forecasting a real hit to India's overall GDP. We're talking somewhere between 0.2 and maybe even 0.5%. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, but for a fast-growing economy like India's, that is a serious, serious setback. Okay, so you think India might just have to take it, right? Nope. They didn't just sit back and absorb this punch. They got ready to punch back, launching this whole multi-pronged counter-strategy. And their first move? It was all diplomatic. They went straight on the attack, publicly calling out the U.S. for what they called double standards. Their argument was pretty straightforward. Wait a minute, you're penalizing us for trading with Russia when you and your allies in Europe are doing the exact same thing, but way, way more of it. And this public protest was just step one of a really clear three-part playbook. So number two, they started looking for clever workarounds, like could they route their exports through hubs in the Gulf to get around the U.S. tariffs? And number three, they put retaliation right on the table. They made it clear they were ready to hit back with their own tariffs on American goods, which, by the way, is something they're allowed to do under WTO rules. And you know what's really fascinating here? This pressure from the outside actually created this super rare moment of unity inside India. I mean, Indian politics can be really divided.
But on this, the ruling party and the main opposition party were on the same page. They both called it economic bullying.
So things are escalating, right? It really looks like we're heading for a full-blown trade war. And then the story takes this completely unexpected legal twist. And the twist came from inside the U.S. itself.
Yeah, you heard that right. A U.S. court declared the tariffs unlawful. Just declared them unlawful. This wasn't some international court or another country saying it. This was a check coming from inside the American legal system. A huge deal.
And this ruling was an absolute game changer. It basically threw the whole long-term future of the tariff into doubt. All of a sudden, India's negotiating position got a whole lot stronger. And it made any future trade moves by the U.S. way more complicated.
Which brings us to where we are now, this kind of unresolved standoff. The situation is still super tense. The tariffs are technically still there, but their legal ground is, well, it's pretty shaky. So, what happens next?
Okay, so this table is a great way to see it all in one place. You've still got that 25% tariff on the books, with threats of more. The U.S. complaints, they're still the same. The Indian sectors we talked about, they're still feeling that pain. But, and this is the big but, that U.S. court ruling has suspended the order, throwing a huge wrench in the works. So now, the trade talks are ongoing, but India is coming to the table with a much, much stronger hand.
And that's really what this all boils down to. This key idea of a geopolitical leverage. What experts are saying is that this whole thing isn't really about economics or trade deficits. It's about using economic muscle as a tool, as a way to influence a major partner's foreign policy.
So what's the path forward from here? Well, there are really two things happening at once. On one side, you have these high-stakes negotiations for a big trade deal. But on the other side, India is also hedging its bets, right? It's working hard to find other places to sell its goods. The EU, Southeast Asia, Africa, so it's not so dependent on any one country. It's this tricky balancing act between standing firm diplomatically and just being smart about its economy.
And all of this leaves us with one really big, lingering question. Was this whole thing just a temporary feud, something driven by politics that will eventually blow over? Or are we looking at a permanent crack in the very foundation of how global trade works? A sign of a new era where economic policy is just another weapon in the arsenal? Honestly, that's the question that leaders not just in the US and India, but all over the world are now trying to figure out.